So today we have with us Susan Levin. She's the Director of Nutrition Education at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in Washington, D.C., which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting preventative medicine, better nutrition, and higher standards in medical research. Susan researches and writes about the connection between plant-based diets and chronic disease and assists in teaching nutrition and health classes to those participating in clinical studies. Susan is also an avid runner and a mother to a baby boy. Thanks for being with us here today, Susan.
Thanks for asking me. This is great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Really great to have you.
So in the world of gestational diabetes and pregnancy, many mothers believe that they have to eat meat, fish, and especially dairy in order to grow a healthy baby in utero. And you hear this all the time. Mothers are saying, I need more protein, I need more protein, I need more protein. But, we know, and you have written extensively, that eating large quantities of fat, especially saturated fat, causes insulin resistance and increases the mother's risk for gestational diabetes. So that being said, is it necessary to eat foods like meat, fish, and dairy in order to actually grow a healthy child?
Well, specifically in the world of gestational diabetes, it's not only not necessary, it's not ideal. Eating animal products comes with its own hosts of risks for anybody, but especially someone who might be at risk for gestational diabetes. You want to go into a pregnancy as healthy as possible, and that means eating the healthiest diet that we know exists, and we know that diet is a plant-based, low-fat diet. So yeah, for gestational, you want to minimize your risk as much as possible, because once you are diagnosed with gestational, your options are pretty limited.
So is eating foods like meat and fish actually not only not as healthy as a plant-based diet, but actually puts you at risk for gestational diabetes?
Well, it does, in the sense that some risk factors for gestational diabetes include things that are not controllable, like your age or genes. But some of the risk factors that are controllable include your blood pressure and your weight. And we know from research that people who follow vegan diets are in the healthiest weight category. So that's where you want to be when you get pregnant. So this is the ideal scenario to be prepared for pregnancy, by being as healthy as possible and keeping your blood pressure in a normal range. And again, we know that a plant-based diet is the best way to have that normal range of blood pressure.
Yeah. So pregnant mothers are always worried that they will deprive their child of essential nutrition like vitamin B12, calcium, healthy fats. So they're really concerned about this when following a plant-based diet. What is the best way to address this?
Well, you should be concerned. And what's so interesting to me about pregnancy and being a mother is that we suddenly become interested in our health because we're more interested in our fetus's health than our own, apparently. But I always tell people that the things you don't want to expose your child to. So, for example, fish. Fish comes with a lot of risk factors. If you're pregnant, you want to avoid this fish. And when you do eat fish, don't eat too much fish because it has a buildup of toxins in it. You don't want to expose your fetus to those toxins. And to me, it's like, why would I want to expose myself? So as a man who will never get pregnant, right? Like, it's not that it's healthy for you, but bad for the fetus. It's bad for everybody. So again, avoiding the animal products, especially things like fish, which I think gets a little confusing because you have some people in the advocacy community saying, "Oh no, you need to eat fish for your baby's health." And I would say, no, you don't need to expose yourself to those risks when you can get the same nutrients that they say are good in fish. You can get those from plant sources that come with no risk at all, and actually come with benefits. Like, comes with fiber, it comes with antioxidants, it comes with phytochemicals, all the things you want to have in your body, especially when you're pregnant.
Okay, so if a pregnant mother came to you and said, "Hey, I'm really concerned about my calcium intake, and I know that eating dairy products or drinking milk is actually a good way to go in order to get more calcium," what might you say to someone who thinks that?
Yeah, so specifically for those nutrients like calcium, yes, there's a lot of calcium in dairy products, but there's also a lot of saturated fat, cholesterol, and other toxins, and animal protein, which comes with other risks, as you well know. You can get that calcium where the cow ideally got that calcium. You can get that from your dark leafy greens. You can get that from beans. And again, these are food sources that come with not only no risk associated, but they come with all these other benefits. This ability to make your insulin more sensitive, this ability to make you feel full and fewer calories, its ability to keep your digestion clean and fast. And for someone who's pregnant, again, having a nice, not being constipated is a pretty good side effect. So again, get your calcium from those plant sources. And you mentioned iron specifically, and iron is, people who follow plant-based diets actually consume more iron than people who follow omnivorous diets. It's just a different kind of iron. It's a non-heme iron. So being sure to eat, again, some different types of leafy greens, like your spinach and your chard, and then eating your lentils and your beans. Greens and beans are going to have all these amazing minerals that you need and that are very helpful for you.
Cool. Could you go into a little bit of detail here about the difference between heme iron and non-heme iron? Because I think a lot of people don't really understand that there are two different types of iron, and that, you know, heme iron has a little bit higher risk associated with it.
So yeah, there's heme, which means blood. So you get heme iron from the blood of animals, and non-heme, so it's non-blood. It comes from plants. And the heme iron is, you know, to put a positive spin on it, you would say it's highly absorbable. But to be frank, it's almost over-absorbable. Your body has no mechanism to regulate the absorption of heme iron. It just absorbs whether you need it or not. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because iron can be toxic. Iron is associated with cancer. High iron levels are associated with diabetes and heart disease as well. So you'd never, ever want to overdo iron. And we see that in all sorts of dietary advice for men or non-menstruating women. You don't want to supplement with iron because too much iron can be toxic. So non-heme iron, and this is what's so great about non-heme iron, when you eat a plant that's high in iron, and there's lots of iron in your plant foods, but because it's not heme, your body knows exactly what to do. It recognizes it, and it recognizes that it doesn't need to absorb it if you have enough in your system already. So I think, you know, people who worry about having too low iron stores, or I'm on the low normal side of iron stores. Personally, I think that's a good thing. I don't know why you'd want to be high normal on something that's associated with such chronic diseases as cancer and diabetes. And the sources from plant foods are so healthy. They don't come with those bad side effects and those high risks that other food sources that have the heme iron do.
It's interesting, actually, because most people, you know, are unaware that iron overload is even a thing. And so, you know, we're always told that, you know, you should minimize your risk for anemia and make sure that you're getting plenty of iron. But you're saying, actually, no, it's possible to get too much iron, especially if that iron is coming from heme sources.
Yeah, and for anyone who's diagnosed with anemia, there may be a situation where you need to supplement with iron, but I would do it with extreme caution. I would do it with the supervision of a clinician to make sure once your iron is stable and where it needs to be, you stop with that supplement. Ideally, you could build up your iron stores to normal levels with food, because it's with non-heme iron sources of food, because it's safer, as we just discussed. And especially for women who are pregnant, because there is so much hype around making sure you have enough iron, because your blood volume grows so much that it may diffuse your iron to a point where it looks like you're anemic. And in that case, yeah, you just eat more plants, eat more non-heme sources, and your body will figure out exactly what you need and how much you need. But don't go crazy with the supplements. And sometimes those prenatal vitamins are packed pretty high with iron. So I would, again, just be cautious.
And how about the healthy fats? How could a pregnant woman be confident that she is getting enough essential fatty acids for her and the baby?
Well, I think they do it the same way everyone else does it. They make sure that they're eating lots of plant foods, because if you just eat your plant foods and you eat a variety of them, you're going to get this perfect ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, which is what it's all about. It's about converting your omega-3 to its elongated form, the DHA and the EPA. And when you get those elongated forms of omega-3s, you have all the benefits to your brain health, and your fetus has the benefits. But you have to eat those sources in the right ratio. You can overdo your omega-6, it doesn't allow your omega-3s to elongate to those better forms. So plants, because their fats are right in that perfect ratio, they're like 1-2, 1-1, 1-3, and the recommendation is 1-4, 3-6. So if you go a little bit more to the 1-3, 1-2, you're doing even better. If you're not sure, and honestly, when you're pregnant, it's not the best time to try to figure out if you're doing it right. You don't quite have the time that you may have as just a non-pregnant adult. If you're not sure, take an algae-derived EPA DHA. That's safe. You don't want to take too much of that either. But if you just take, you know, a range that's within the recommended amount, then you should be fine. And you can figure out how to make it all work with your diet later.
So the recommended ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is a 1-4 ratio.
Correct. That's our government recommendation. Most of us eat about a 1-10. So we're not doing so good. And the resolution proposed mostly by marketing is, well, then you need to jack up your 3s to get them into that range. But really, we just need to pull down our 6s and pull down all our other fats. So what you find naturally in the plant food sources is what you're getting.
So if somebody decides that they want to adopt a plant-based diet, how do they actually determine what their omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is?
You know, what's so great is you don't even have to think about it. This is kind of much like with everything with a low fat, so not a lot of added oils, vegan diet, it all just kind of works out in your favor. And if you do that, you're getting exactly what you need, because the actual amount of omega-3s that you need in your diet, very tiny. But it's the elongation that's really critical. So if all of your other fats are low, and that's what you're doing, if you're just eating plants and I'm not talking about coconuts and avocados, but all the other plants, the kind of the non-tropical plants, you're going to be in that perfect range. You don't have to think about this so hard. However, if you find yourself unable to avoid olive oil and and all these other fats in your diet, then maybe you need to think more about, well, maybe I need to eat more walnuts or flax seeds, because those are very concentrated sources of omega-3s. And that's what I need a little bit in my diet to compensate for all the other fats that I'm eating.
Got it. Okay, that's super helpful, actually. So let's back up here. How does a mother know if she actually has gestational diabetes to begin with?
Well, she is tested around 24, 28, somewhere between 24 and 28 weeks. The clinician will give her a pretty unsavory tasting drink test to see how her blood sugars react. And that's, as far as I know, that's pretty standard. Whether you're at risk or not, you will get that test. These days, if you go to kind of a standard mainstream OBGYN.
Okay, so they'll give you a sugary beverage, and then they'll monitor your blood glucose over the course of the next couple hours. And then if your blood glucose is too high, then they just say blanket, you have gestational diabetes.
Well, I think they'll do some further tests, but yeah, it's a good, maybe give you another one of those tests. I honestly was so adamant about not drinking that drink because I found it like I was pregnant and being very cautious about what went into my body. I was like, why would I drink what looks like concentrated Gatorade, which I wouldn't touch on a non-pregnant day? So they let me prick my finger for 3 times a day for a week just to make sure my blood sugars were reacting well to all the foods I ate. So that may be another option for people as well.
How can an expectant mother use food to avoid actually getting gestational diabetes?
Well, so some risk factors are unavoidable. I mentioned your genetics, your age, but some risk factors you are in your control, and that includes your body weight going into the pregnancy, and it includes your blood pressure. And we know from all sorts of data that if you follow a low-fat plant, actually, if you just follow a vegan diet, you're more likely to be in the healthy body weight range than if you don't. So by having a healthy plant-based diet, you're more likely to have a healthy BMI. That puts you at less risk. And it also, you're more likely to have a healthy or a normal blood pressure range, which your high blood pressure could also be a risk factor for developing gestational diabetes. And maybe, if you do develop or diagnosed with gestational diabetes, then you need to start thinking about not only how to control it while you're pregnant, but how to minimize your risk for developing type 2 after the pregnancy. Because even though once the baby is born, that gestational diabetes disappears, so to speak, you are at much higher risk for developing type 2. So the goal at that point, if you haven't already, is to adopt the healthiest diet possible to minimize your risk. Because frankly, the likelihood of developing type 2 after gestational is very, very high. So you want to do everything you can to avoid that risk.
Right. So if a woman is diagnosed while she's pregnant, and she's seeing these higher readings on the blood glucose meter during pregnancy, can that be fixed? Can she make changes and then actually see those numbers improve?
You can see control of your better control of your blood sugars, but you can't cure it. You can't fix it at that point. And it's a really good time to not try to beat yourself up. Well, it's never a good time to beat yourself up, but at that point, you just have to keep very strict blood sugar control. And it's fairly different advice than people who develop type 2 when they're non-pregnant, because at that point you can if you have an out of control blood sugar reading once and then it comes in control as your diet improves, it's not such a big deal. But that is not something you want to play around with when you're pregnant, because it can be very harmful to the fetus.
So the goal with gestational diabetes is not to reverse it, like you're saying, right? It's more to manage it, as in a
Keep
person
your blood
with type 1
sugars.
diabetes is not trying to reverse type 1 diabetes.
Exactly.
It's trying to manage it so their blood glucose is as normal as possible.
Exactly. And I don't know if it's correct, but I've always said in the past that to me, gestational looks more like type 1, because it's not a time to try to fix or reverse, even though it acts more like type 2. It's an insulin sensitivity issue. But yeah, your thinking needs to be more about control at that point.
So do you know anything about how eating meat, fish, and or dairy can affect morning sickness in particular?
Oh, that's a good question. I know that morning sickness is very normal and natural, and some research shows beneficial to the outcome of the child once he or she is born. However, I think that there's been some research to show an association between intake of saturated fat and extreme morning sickness. So while I would never advise anyone to eat a lot of saturated fat anyway, but when you're pregnant, if you're feeling ill, maybe that's a time to analyze if you're eating a lot of saturated fat. And secondly, I think what's more interesting about morning sickness is the research showing that it may be a manifestation of the biological your biological wisdom telling you to avoid eating animal products, because animal products are the number one source for food pathogens. And at that vulnerable state, the first trimester when morning sickness develops, the last thing you want is a pathogen in your system that could potentially harm that fetus. So I think that's a more interesting course of study, is looking at the evolution of morning sickness. I know there is some research also to show that populations who don't eat a lot of animal products don't have morning sickness. And as a personal aside, I had no morning sickness during my pregnancy, and I'm well aware of the research showing morning sickness may be beneficial for the outcome of your baby. So I was concerned, like, why aren't I nauseous? But then when I read more about how some populations that don't eat meat at all don't have morning sickness, I wondered if my being vegan for 20 plus years had some effect on that outcome of my pregnancy. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting topic to look more into.
That's really interesting, actually, because like you said, you've been vegan now for 20 years. Is that right?
A little over 20 years, yeah.
Okay. And what prompted you to become a vegan in the first place?
Honestly, it was an ethical decision that I made to avoid first meat, and then a bit of hypocrisy led me to feel like, oh wait, how could I be consuming dairy if, if I don't approve of the meat agriculture practices? The dairy are certainly as bad, if not worse. Eggs too. So I cut that out. And but that's when I noticed better health outcomes personally, was when I gave up the dairy and the eggs. And that's when I became more obsessed with the nutrition side of this whole vegan thing. And as my health got better and I felt better, and I would hear other people tell me their complaints, I couldn't help but want to say, oh, you should really try a vegan diet. But I felt like they thought I was coming from an ethical angle and they wouldn't believe me, which is what led me to go back to school for dietetics, because I knew there was something more scientific to all of this than just how I felt personally. But yeah, that's what got me here all those years ago.
Got it. So it's like the environmental issues were the first thing that came into your mind, and then you became a vegan as a result of that. Then from there, you got the health benefits, and then you went to go study the nutrition aspects of a plant-based diet.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm so glad I did, because as you know, there's so much evidence for this. It's you can't believe anyone out there with a medical degree who can open a medical journal isn't advocating for this, with all the evidence from population studies, from case control studies, and then just anecdotally people's stories. I mean, you have an amazing story, Cyrus, and my story's a little less, convincing, but it's like everyone should be talking about this. So I'm so grateful that I did go back and look at look at this through a mainstream lens, because even through the mainstream lens, it seems very obvious that people should be eating this way.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem right now, is that we have a whole, majority of the physicians have been educated with a general lack of focus on nutrition education. So, physicians are genuinely very altruistic people who literally just want to help as many people as they possibly can. And then you have people who are diagnosed with some form of chronic disease, whether it's type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes. They go to their doctor, and their doctor says, oh, it's okay. Go ahead and eat meat. Go ahead and eat dairy. You actually need more protein. That's what's going to help you. And so generally people, I think, are very confused about whether or not that's the right advice, or maybe I should go to a plant-based diet where there's less protein, and then all of a sudden it just becomes too confusing, right?
Right. And I think, from talking to doctors over the past 10 years, because we work with so many who have kind of seen the light, I'm realizing that what they're advocating in their practices is a diet that they just kind of believed was better, and they're as vulnerable to the media and to marketing as anybody. So if they personally believe Atkins diet is the way to go, or the zone diet is the way to go, or paleo is the way to go, if that's their personal bias because they're a victim to marketing and media, that's what they advocate. I mean, that's what I hear from doctors all the time. It's like, that's frightening. but I wish they would turn to the science as much as they do for other parts of their practice, or admit, like, I just don't have the education here, and I don't have time for it because I'm studying about how to, open up your heart. So why don't you go talk to someone who does have a little bit more education in this area?
Yeah, I think that's very well said, actually. You just sort of like outsourcing the nutrition education to somebody who actually has studied it. But then there's also one more problem here, which is that a lot of the nutritionists and RDs who have actually gone to school for nutrition, they are also influenced by marketing, and they're also influenced by information that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, which basically says eat more protein, eat more dairy, eat more meat, because that's the way to reverse chronic disease. So even when a doctor does do the outsourcing to somebody who's actually a qualified, professional in the nutrition business, still the information doesn't really come through, because there's so much more research that's been done over the past 5 to 10 years that totally flips on the head of what we believe to be the truth 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that it's slowly changing. I say that only because some of the more mainstream organizations do have positions that are drastically different than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, even the dietary guidelines for Americans, which has to be filtered through the USDA of all organizations, says a vegetarian diet is a healthful eating pattern that people should be following. And it has a vegetarian, it has a vegan index in the back to show you how to do it. That's the dietary guidelines. Like if that's the USDA speaking, believe you me, the last thing in their financial interest is to have people eating vegan diets. Then the science must be pretty rock solid that they just can't even avoid it. And then even the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the governing body for registered dietitians, has a position paper that says vegan diets are not only healthful and adequate, they're beneficial in terms of dealing with diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. They're beneficial for children. They're beneficial for pregnant people. So slowly it's changing, and I think eventually more and more nutritionists, dietitians, doctors, nurses will be reading these papers and realizing what they learned in their younger years may not be completely accurate.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. Now, another condition that a lot of pregnant moms are at risk for is preeclampsia or hypertension, high blood pressure. So do you know anything about how a mother can minimize her risk for hypertension and whether a plant-based diet is actually effective at doing so?
Absolutely. So we know, again, from small studies, from large reviews, that eating a plant-based diet is beneficial on blood pressure, meaning it lowers blood pressure. In fact, a staple dietary recommendation for people with hypertension is the DASH diet. If you've ever heard the dietary approach to stop hypertension. The DASH diet, as mainstream as it is, its foundation is vegetarian diets, because people saw, oh, eating a vegetarian diet means you have lower blood pressure. Well, let's build a diet that's mostly vegetarian. And that was the genesis of the DASH diet. But there was a review published recently looking at blood pressure, comparing plant-based and non-plant-based, and plant-based did better. So again, if you are at risk for high blood pressure, if you have high blood pressure before you get pregnant, you want to handle that with a healthy dietary pattern. If you are pregnant and your blood pressure goes up, and that can happen too, you want to adopt this low-fat plant-based diet. And in terms of preeclampsia, I think, one of the, and I may be out of date here, but one of the only studies I know looking at preeclampsia was a study done on this community of midwives, basically in Tennessee, called The Farm. It was founded by Ina Mae Gaskin, who anyone who's been pregnant and has looked into just midwifery books or issues knows who Ina Mae Gaskin is. What they may not know is her farm, The Farm, uses a completely vegan diet. She doesn't really talk about it in her books for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, these researchers went down there and just kind of looked at the outcomes of the pregnancies for their patients, clients down there. And the outcomes of those pregnancies in terms of preeclampsia, like there was virtually none, like compared to what you would see in a hospital, the best hospitals in the country. Almost, maybe there was one case out of 800, I don't remember, but it was just a statistic you just don't see. And I think that speaks well to not only maybe Ina Mae Gaskin in midwifery, but it also speaks, I think, to the diet and what kind of diet were these women eating when they had their babies. It's pretty incredible outcomes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's actually, I saw a documentary that was made. I think it's called Birth Story.
Oh, was Ina Mae Gaskin, was it about the farm?
Yes.
See, I need to get into that stuff, but yeah, it's pretty amazing place.
So, how does eating meat, fish, and dairy affect the kid's health postpartum? Is there research that we know about this? Do we have an insight?
Yeah, well, we know that children who eat plant-based diets, vegetarian diets, do better. You'll be surprised to hear that they eat fewer salty and sweet snacks. They eat more fruits and vegetables. They grow up with less risk for obesity. They have, they're more likely to be set up in their adult years for continuing to follow a healthy diet and having a healthy body weight, which body weight is associated with every chronic disease that, from which we suffer in America anyway. So yeah, getting kids started on this way of eating early is probably your best bet for long-term health outcomes, not just short-term, because you get those too, but long-term is probably just as critical.
And I know there's a lot of mothers who are very apprehensive about raising their child on whether you call it a plant-based diet or a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, because again, there's a whole bunch of, information floating around that says, don't do this because it's actually unhealthy, right? Your kid may actually develop an increased risk for chronic disease if you feed them a vegetarian diet. So given that information, is it safe to raise a child on a, plant-based diet or vegetarian diet or vegan diet?
Yeah, it's beyond safe. Like, we see benefits actually. So I think, yeah, we got to get through this first conversation with the naysayers. Is it safe? Absolutely, it's safe. It's completely adequate. Again, the A&D, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, has a position on this very topic, and it's looked at all the research, and all the research says it's completely safe, whether it's vegan, vegetarian, plant-based, whatever you want to call it. You can get all your nutrients on this diet. Of course, the one exception is B12. B12 needs to be supplemented when you're vegan, but it's pretty easy to do. So yes, adequate. But then beyond that, like, I think the conversation needs to go even a step further. It's better. Like, these kids eat better. They do better in terms of eating more fruits and vegetables. Like, everybody's goal in the world is to try to figure out how to get kids to eat fruits and vegetables. Well, maybe this is the secret. You just get them to eat plants in the beginning, and somehow they're going to have different taste buds. I don't know, but they eat more fruits and vegetables, and they eat fewer salty snacks, and they eat fewer sugary snacks. So we have that data. And again, it sets them up for these lifelong habits. And again, that's not an assumption. There's research to back that up as well.
So there's research to show it's not only safe, it's actually beneficial. But why is there so much controversy around this? Where does it stem from?
I don't know. I mean, I could be a conspiracy theorist and say that there's no money to be made in healthy eating. I think maybe there's even money to be lost, although I think that's probably short-sighted. There's different ways to profit from people being healthy, right? You open more gyms. I don't know, but I think that's a problem. There's no immediate income to be made. I think that there's a lot of industry that benefits from scare tactics, so or misinformation. So dairy, for example, is a huge marketing industry for decades, for more than decades, of trying to convince people you absolutely need to drink the milk of a cow. It's asinine, but we believe it. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, dietitians have been hearing this all their lives. You get inundated with this information when you're in kindergarten, and all the nutrition information sheets you have are sponsored by dairy. So of course we believe we need dairy. But once you read the science, it just doesn't pan out. Like, it's not there. There's no data, no science to back any of that up. So I think there's definitely that component to it. I don't know why people get so threatened by the idea of people eating vegan or plant-based. They say diet is as sensitive a topic as religion and politics. So maybe nobody wants to hear that what they're doing is not right. I don't know. But, it's very personal. I get it. But to anyone out there who thinks this information is somehow an affront to their belief system, I would just say it's just science. Like, I can't control what it's saying. Like, it's just saying that. I can't factor in economics. I can't factor in, people's the perceived job loss that might happen if no one's milking cows. Like, that's not my job. I just have to look at the science, and here's what the science says. And I guess that's going to be terrifying to some people who have a different stake in nutrition information.
So there's a very interesting video made by Dr. Michael Greger of nutritionfacts.org, and he showed that heart disease can start as early as age 10. And we see this a lot in children who are fed diets that contain meat, fish and dairy, and especially diets that contain a high amount of saturated fat. And so, we always just think of heart disease as being something that happens when you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s. But the signs of heart disease in terms of like endothelial damage and vascular inflammation, those things start at a very young age. And, it's unfortunate that that's actually the truth, because when that starts to happen, then your risk for heart disease goes up astronomically by the time you hit your 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Right. Yeah, because it really is kind of a disease of time, right? Like start now, because when you have, it's not normal to have a heart attack in your 40s. And I think a lot of people think that that's just normal, like 40s or 50s, like, well, it's time. It's like, no, it's not. It's time in the sense you've been eating so poorly for so many years, but it's not a natural occurrence. It's definitely a buildup. And I would argue now there's even some research to show it happens in children younger than 10. I think, there's some research that there's some bad things happening in utero when to a baby's heart when mothers don't eat well. So it's critical. It's critical, in utero. It's critical when they're infants, when they're toddlers, children. But I also want to encourage people to know it's never too late, because you can always, plenty of research also to show you can reverse the damage that you've done over the years. So that's important too.
That's great. So you've been eating a vegan diet for over 20 years. Can you tell us, what did you eat while you were pregnant, and what do you eat now?
Ooh, that's a good question. It was funny, when I was pregnant, I didn't have any cravings. I wasn't super hungry, I think, because I was just I felt so full of baby. I felt like I didn't feel every minute of my life. So I did make sure that when I did eat, it was pretty nutrient packed. Like, I didn't want to waste my calories if I didn't have that big of an appetite. So knowing that my protein needs were highly increased because of a growing baby, I did eat a fair amount of like tofu and beans, maybe more tofu than I normally would, just because I wanted to get some pretty protein-packed calories in there. Whole grains, fruit. Yeah, it was a pretty normal me diet. And then really my appetite after having the baby and nursing, I was just like so hungry all the time. It was great, right? Because these calories, this weight's just dropping off of you, but you're eating all you want. And again, I would just kind of ate with a lot of wild abandon. But again, if that probably meant like a handful of peanuts or, but a lot of beans and grains. And really my palate is pretty is pretty oriented towards healthful foods, thank goodness. So just eating a lot more.
That's awesome. And what does your child eat?
Well, he's 2, almost, and he's starting to kind of eat what we eat at the table. He loves tofu. He loves kind of getting more interested in broccoli, loves lentils, any kind of fruit he'll eat, some grains, sometimes bread. I can't get him to eat a sandwich, which would make my life a lot easier, but he won't do it. So yeah, he eats what we eat pretty much. And I think, interestingly, they always say that it takes 7 times of introducing a food before a kid will actually eat it. So don't give up. And I'm kind of seeing that to be true. Like I mentioned with broccoli, like finally he's putting it in his mouth and he's eating it. And like, oh, it really worked. I know, I wasn't sure he'd ever eat broccoli, but it finally paid off. So yeah, just kind of sticking to it and watching us. Like, we always make sure we sit down and have a meal together, and he looks at his food like, what the heck is this? And I show him my place, like, it's the same thing. And he's like, oh, okay, he eats it.
I'm actually pretty impressed, because I'm a 36-year-old guy and I still don't eat broccoli. So that's impressive.
That's terrible.
Can't get into it. So you have no plans on ever feeding your kid meat, dairy, fish. You're going to raise your
Absolutely
kid 100%
not.
vegan, no questions asked, right?
Oh, I would never do that. It's one of those things I just know too much. I went to a meeting the other day with other mothers of toddlers, and the woman said her pediatrician insisted that her 1-year-old start drinking cow's milk. And it wasn't my meeting to run, but my jaw hit the floor. And thank goodness the woman running it, it's like, that's ridiculous. Your kid doesn't need cow's milk. And thank you. It's just, but no, I would never, I just know too much, and I would never put that in my kid's body. And I'm kind of jealous, like, I wish my parents had done that for me when I was young, and then I could have a lifetime of healthful eating instead of half my life. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun to watch, and I can't wait to see, when he starts to rebel, how that manifests. But hopefully it won't manifest in a fast food restaurant.
So there's the recommendations for breastfeeding is for a mother to breastfeed their child for as long as possible, closer to about a year of age before they start to wean them and then or change them onto eating solid food. So there's a lot of mothers who want to adhere to that, but for whatever reason, a month into after delivery, 2 months, 3 months, it's very difficult for them to breastfeed. So in that situation, the recommendation is, okay, shift over to cow's milk formula, because cow's milk formula is the second best alternative to mother's breast milk. If you wanted to maintain a plant-based diet and not introduce cow's milk at a young age, what options do mothers have for a plant-based formula?
Well, there's soy formula. And as far as I know, that's it. And soy formula, to get super technical, isn't necessarily vegan, because it might have like a animal-based vitamin D, for example. But if you have no choice, and my advice to any new mother is, even if you think, if there's some gray area there, hire a lactation consultant and just be sure. Second to that, there's also human breast milk banks. So you could get human milk from a human milk bank if you're fortunate enough to have access to something like that. And they can be expensive, but there are also some programs where it's like sliding scale or donated. But there's always soy milk formula. And I just can't emphasize enough to people that you don't, again, this is one of those things you don't mess around with. If breast milk is not an option for you, if human milk bank is not an option for you, do not be a hero. Just do the soy milk formula. It is honky-dory. That is, you don't start making your own formulas. You don't think, I'll just give them some soy milk and start them on food early. I don't know what people think, but you don't mess around with those early months and what a baby needs to be consuming.
So let me ask you this now. Is it binary, right? In the sense that, is it either you're eating a meat diet or meat-based diet, or you're eating a vegan diet, and that's it? Because there's a lot of women who don't necessarily want to become a vegan or vegetarian, but they maybe want to start moving in that direction. So is it possible to get a lot of the benefits even if there still is a little bit of meat and or fish and or dairy in your diet?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, there are still benefits. And we see this again in population studies where you start, you're eating omnivorous diet or non-vegetarian, and you go to pesco-vegetarian, to semi-vegetarian, to vegetarian, to vegan. And it's a hierarchy. The risk declines or increases with, it declines with the less animal products you have in your diet. So that tells me, that there's a spectrum here, that if you are somewhere in between vegan and non-vegetarian, you're going to be doing a little bit better, and you can always work your way up to, bad, good, better, best, or whatever. But I think reducing is fine. I don't think you're going to get all the full benefits that you might see when you get all the animal products out of your diet, but I think you'd be remiss to think it's all or nothing.
Okay, great. So let's give a 60-second elevator pitch here. We want to make sure that all of our listeners at the end of this can walk away and start making changes immediately. So if you're a pregnant mom or you recently delivered a child, and they're looking to you to say, Susan, tell me what to do. what advice would you give to them?
Okay, my advice would be to look at what you eat now, and tweak it. So if I love my spaghetti with marinara and meatballs kind of a gal. Okay, we'll try spaghetti with marinara and vegetables. If you like your oatmeal with your milk in the morning, okay, we'll just try oat milk with almond milk and some berries in the morning. Just make those little small tweaks to what you're already comfortable with. And then I think eventually you start to read more and learn more about, I didn't know there were three, who knows how many different types of lentils there are in this world. I didn't know that when I was, first eating a vegan diet. I thought there were black beans, bagels, and bananas. Like, that was my diet. But now I know I have 10 different beans I can't even pronounce in my freezer right now. And it's all these grains and vegetables and fruits that I didn't give the time of day. But your options just increase, to me, 100-fold from what I was eating as a child when I was omnivorous or a young adult to what I eat now. I mean, it's amazing. So try to realize that you're not only going into something, it's not a diet that's what you're not eating. It's a diet about what you will be eating. You're not going to believe it. You're not going to believe, forget how good you're going to feel and maybe how good you're going to look. Like, all that's just sort of these side effects to eating a more varied and delicious diet. So start small, that's fine. But some people, though, I was an all or nothing kind of person. I just said, I'm done. And that's how I operate. But I did, again, like I said, I jumped right into beans, bagels, and bananas. Like, I didn't even know about all these other things. So for some people, it might be more important to ease into that kind of variety so you don't feel like you're going without. That wasn't a 60-second elevator speech at all.
It's fine. I'll give you 120 seconds. It's fine.
I was crawling up 5 flights of stairs.
No worries. Well, thanks for taking the time to be with us here today. I feel like, I learned a lot because I'm not a woman and I have never given birth before, but, it's really interesting to learn how plant-based nutrition can extend into multiple realms, right? It can affect children. It can affect middle-aged. It can affect teenagers. It can affect, kids in their 20s and 30s and then going on to middle-aged and beyond. And understanding the actual biological mechanisms of what's happening in the prenatal stage and then in the postpartum stage, to me, is just fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's been a great learning experience for me too. As a dietitian for 10 years before I got pregnant, and I just learned so much. But it's just so easy. It's like amazing to me. Like, this is so easy. I can't believe I have a job. It's not that hard. But don't tell.
Definitely. Super cool. So thanks again for being here, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.